Good morning. How are we doing this morning?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Trying to stand up, but we'll go from there. For those of you who don't know, we moved into our new home this weekend, so we're very excited about that, but it makes for very tiring days. Jeff and Amy are on the mainland from what we can tell, and they should be back in just a few days. It looks like they had a wonderful trip, so we're so glad they're able to have a break and get away and just enjoy some time together. So we are so glad you're here to worship with us today. If you are a first-time visitor, we are so glad you're here. Please make sure to talk to us as you leave. We're just excited to have you here. For everybody else, we're excited you're here to worship with our family. So today we're going to talk about balance. I know we've been talking about that for a couple weeks, but today we're going to talk about balance of being served versus serving. Serve versus being served. And so as I thought about that today and this week, it drew me back to a memory of when I got to 20 years ago, go and see the Field of Dreams. Now, I know there may not be huge baseball fans in the room, but if you are a baseball fan, Field of Dreams is a huge deal. And I remember walking onto the field, and all these people are playing on this field that this movie was actually made on. That field is still there today. But back in 1989, Kevin Costner was in this movie, and they decided to make this huge movie that they didn't think would do anything. And all of a sudden, it has become a huge movie across the generations. And so you have Ray, who is a farmer. He's not sure what he's supposed to do with that. And there he sits, and all of a sudden he hears a voice that says, "If you build it, he will come." And then that leads to apparently plowing under all of his crops and building a baseball stadium in the middle of Iowa. A lot of people think he's crazy. A lot of people are wondering what's going on. As you watch the movie, it progresses as he goes across the country and runs into people that he's led to help. He's hearing voices still, which in today's world, they would probably go and have him committed for that. But in the movie, he's hearing voices as he goes. One of those people that he runs into is a guy named Archie Graham, Moonlight Graham. And Moonlight Graham is a guy that he finds in the hometown of Archie's hometown, where he has been a doctor for years. Now, he had been passed away a long time, but apparently he is able to go back in time. He's able to meet him and see him. And he's able to have a conversation with him. And in that conversation, he asked him if there was one thing he could do, what would that be? And so he tells him how he wishes he could just stand up there and wink at the pitcher like he knew what was coming right before the pitch. To play ball, to hit the ball one time. He had only gotten to be in one at-bat in one Major League Baseball game in his whole career. And after that at-bat, the season was over, and he, the next season, did not want to go back to the minors, so he just retired. And he went home and was a doctor. And so he tells them, I've got a place that you can go and play. And he says, no. He's like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And so they leave, and then as they're driving, they run into the young Archie, who talks about baseball and talks about all the stuff. And they bring him to the field, and he's able to play with all of those Major League Baseball players from the past. But then you have a scene where his daughter falls, and she's choking. And Archie takes a step towards the field, but realizes that if he makes that step off of that baseball field, he will never be able to go back. And he still takes the step, and the minute he steps off that field, he becomes the doctor that he's always been. And he helps the girl who is choking and helps her to get the hot dog out of her throat. But he looks back, and all of a sudden, Ray realizes he can't go back. And he says a phrase in there whenever they first were talking originally. And he's like, it's got to kill a man that he can't play baseball, that it only lasted 5 minutes in the big leagues. And Doc Graham said something in his doctor's office when they were talking that resonated in that moment with his little girl as he saved her. Son, if I had only gotten to be a doctor for 5 minutes, now that would have been a tragedy. That is a person who knew his purpose, knew exactly what he was supposed to do in life, knew the balance of how he was supposed to serve others and be served. As much as he would have loved to have been able to play baseball his whole career, he also realized that God had put him on this earth to be a doctor to save lives and to help people. We're going to watch some guys today that struggle through that same thing because they're fishermen. And all they're doing is doing their job. And yet here comes God, here comes Jesus along, and he finds these fishermen who are out there working and doing everything that they're doing. Today we're going to learn about these young men and how they were just doing their normal life of being fishermen, jobs that were never going to make them famous. There was good and there was bad that came with their job, but they did their job. And we're going to see how the disciples learned to serve from watching Jesus still being served and how Jesus served them. So our first point today is see the opportunity. The disciples saw there was something different about Jesus. They had heard about all these other guys who'd come along and swore that they were the Messiah. There had been fake messiahs for years. People would follow them, and then they would find out they were fake, and then they would just dwindle away. So when Jesus came along to them in Matthew 4:18 through 22 and says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to be fish for people. Out to fish for people, sorry. Now, as I grew up, I heard that in the King James Version. Follow me, and I will make you fisher of men. At once they left their nets and followed him. These are the same guys that had heard about all these fake messiahs. And instantly they followed Jesus because there was something that was different about Jesus. As we stand in the world today as Christians and we go out and we tell people about the love of God, if they can see the difference in us compared to the world, they are going to follow us to Jesus. But if they see no difference at all, they're just going to keep walking. And that's why it's so important for us to look at Jesus as our example about how we're supposed to live our life. So many things can be changed by the things we do. When I was a youth minister in Branson, Missouri, I've told the story maybe before, I don't know if I've told it here, but there was a little girl named Tess. Tess had a cousin who was 4 years old. When we ran into Tess and her cousin, they were part of our bus ministry, our van ministry that we did. Anna and I were still dating, and so we were still young and still trying to figure things out, but we were doing ministry. So we would pick them up every week. Now Tess would call me Superman because I wore glasses sometimes and sometimes didn't wear glasses, so I was like Clark Kent. I was Superman to her. So she would get on the van, she'd go, "Hi, Superman," and she'd go jump in the back. Now, side story about Tess. She was 5 or 6 years old. I still remember being at a VBS and dropping kids off after VBS, and 10-year-olds were crying in the back of the van, and I couldn't figure out why. And I was like, what is going on? Well, apparently Tess was in the back of the van telling them ghost stories of Branson, and they were scared. So Tess was a very smart little girl. Her cousin, he used to always, I will remember this to this day, he would suck his shirt to the point that there was a black mark on his shirt. And that's all he would do. He would not talk. He would not say anything. He would not interact. They lived in a double-wide trailer together as a family. So their cousins were living together. They lived a really rough life. And so on Tuesdays, they would come to our church, and they would be fed, and we would have a program, and then we would drop them off. I kid you not, I think it was the only meal they had during the week other than their meals at school that was at least healthy. These kids were struggling. In Branson, you hear about all the Ritz and the glitz that happens, but up in the mountains, there's people working 3 jobs. And so this is one of those families. After about 9 months, we finally got her cousin to start talking to us. He actually said words, which was more than he stopped sucking his shirt. He seemed excited to come in. I can remember the day that they told us that they were going to move out of their double-wide trailer. A week or two later, the whole floor caved in of the trailer. I guarantee you that the older ladies in the church that cooked those meals, and the ladies and the people who taught them each and every Tuesday night and every Sunday morning, will have no idea the impact that they had on those kids' lives for the rest of their lives. They knew at that moment that somebody in this world loved them as much as Jesus loved them. And that is our plan and our desire every day that we come through these doors to teach the kids and teach the families in this church. It has to be about family ministry. And sometimes there's no family there to do that, so we have to be the family for them. But for us as church family, we have to start everything at home. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Deuteronomy 6:6-9, these commandments that I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. We are talking about balancing serving and being served. It's important that we see the need in our church here at Brady Lane and step up and be that need. Not afraid that we can't do it, but knowing God will help us be equipped for what we are called to do. And our ministry that we do here at Brady Lane and in the community and in our families may be life-changing and eternal in their consequences. People come to Christ and salvation because of how we serve and because of how we love them. Ministry must start between the walls of our homes. We're going to be talking about that throughout this year, about how important it is for us to try to do ministry, because we only get 1 to 3 hours with the families here, and the rest of the hours are at home. Number 2, we have to be available. The disciples were being asked to do something that they had never been trained for. How would the story have changed if the disciples had followed Jesus and Jesus said, I need you to do this, and they went, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And they just walked away. They had every opportunity and every right to do it because they were not trained to do the things Jesus asked them to do. But Jesus told them, I will equip you and I will help you and I will teach you to be fisher of men. Who in the room today has ever felt like they were asked to do something that they were totally and utterly not equipped to do? We've all had those moments. Now, this is where I have told part of my family that I was going to tell this story, but I have not told everybody. This one's a hard story for us, about a person who was willing to step up and do those things. Faye Pickering was a perfect example of a servant of Christ who did not feel equipped but still did the things that she did. Faye was a grandma. Faye was a bus driver. Faye was a mom. She was a woman who loved Christ in everything she did. I can remember asking her to help me with the 5th and 6th grade girls and teaching them each Sunday morning in a rotation. And she was willing to do it, but she was like, I don't know if I know how to do it. That eventually led to her going to camp with me with the 4th and 6th graders. She would drive the bus and she would go and be with us. That led to her actually becoming a VBS leader and teaching drama. She's like, I'm not sure if I can do this, but I'm going to try it. And so she wrote dramas. And she wrote dramas that were very good. And one year we had Jonah and the Whale upstairs, and the kids were amazed because it felt like they were in the belly of a whale. She drove a school bus each and every day, and if I'm right, I believe she played Christian music each and every day for those kids to hear. She told those kids they were loved each and every day that they got on and off that bus. Those kids knew that she loved them and that Jesus loved them to the very day of her last breath. It was a Thursday, and we were heading to Terre Haute to a doctor's appointment, I believe. I had my radio on me for EMS. I heard a call that there was a medical emergency going on a bus. We found out later that it was Faye that was having the medical emergency while she was driving a school full of kids. Faye knew what was going on, knew what was coming, and told the kids, it'll be okay, just be calm. And she slowly slowed her bus down into the point where it just went into the ditch very, very softly for the safety of all the kids. They said that by the time the first person got to her, she was gone. In her very last breath, in her very last thing that she did, she protected those kids like they were her own. That woman was the epitome of Jesus in everything that we saw. That was 9 years ago, and it still gets to each and every one of us in our family. Faye was an amazing woman. I wish I could have 10 of her. And yet she was still a person who did not feel like that she was that assuming and did not feel like that she could do that much. But she changed lives. She changed my kids' lives. My daughter Lexi still remembers her specifically each and every Wednesday, talking to her, even though she wasn't teaching her, and saying, I will see you next week. It doesn't matter who you are. You have an impact on your families and the others around you. The way we treat each other and speak to each other and love each other. Are we making ourselves available to show God to those around us in the way we interact each and every day? The disciples did not hesitate. They didn't wait to see if there was someone else that was going to be better than them. Jesus said go, and they went. They trusted the plan that God was doing through Jesus. Our third step today is focus on the purpose. It could get so easy to get focused on the why would you call me moment and forget to see that God has called you. The disciples didn't ever do it the right way sometimes. They would argue about who was going to be on the right hand and the left hand of Jesus, and Jesus would get frustrated with them. But they understood that there was something that was special. And Jesus, many of us heard the Great Commission, Matthew 28:18-20. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. That may be a scripture that some of you have heard for the first time or you've heard over and over. But ultimately, it's a reminder that ministry has to start somewhere. It has to start at home. It has to start in our lives. It has to start with us. But Jesus laid it out even more specifically to his disciples before that day in John 13. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciple, if you love one another. That is Jesus' reminder of how we're supposed to be. We don't have to walk up to them and say, do you know Jesus? For some, that may work. But for others, it might be just too much. But just your life and the way you treat them and the way you act will change their life. I told you guys at the beginning of the sermon that we moved in to a new house this weekend. Very interesting situation about that. So last summer, flashback last summer, Lexi was driving the SUV. We pull up to the intersection of Teal and 26th, and all of a sudden the vehicle just stops. Lights start flashing. She's wondering what she's done to break it. She's a young driver. I could have been mean and said, what did you do to my car? But no, I did not do that to her. Because we're in the middle of a hot summer day in the middle of the road, and she doesn't know what's going on. So she's looking at me, and I'm like, I don't know, let me try. So I jump in. I can't get it to go. People are looking at us going, where are you going? What are you doing? And all of a sudden, an officer pulls up behind us and says, hey, can I help you? What's going on? So after he figures out that we're not, some bad guy or something like that, he's like, okay, let's push the car into the gas station. So that's what we did. We pushed it over into the gas station. I thanked him for his help. He said, do you need anything else? I said, no, I think we're good. Now, imagine if we'd been throwing a fit and hitting the car and everything, that officer would be like, what in the world is going on? Here's the moment where the tread hits the road, though. Wednesday, we closed on our house. Sitting across the table selling their house to us was that officer. As you sit there and you go, don't you know, I know you, I know you. And you figure it out, you go, oh, okay. Yeah. If you ever wanted a moment to have an example of why your behavior and your attitude for Christ should matter, let me just give you that example. Because it happens. You may not know people are paying attention, but people pay attention in everything that they do. We are Jesus' disciples in everything that we do. The disciples saw Jesus act out every day the way that he was supposed to be, and they did the same. Do we have the same enthusiasm for Christ? When our children talk about Christ, is it a pause the TV moment or just wait till the show is over in a moment? Do they see that you are different from their friends' parents? Do others who meet you, do they see Christ in you? Do they see the servant's heart? Step 4 is to watch and do work. The disciples watched everything Jesus did, and they went out and did it. And then Jesus said, oh, by the way, I'm going to heaven, and you are in charge now. That is not the plan the disciples signed up for. I'm telling you that right now. But it was Jesus' plan. There was Jesus and his disciples sitting in the upper room on that Thursday night before Jesus would be sent through no less than 6 different trials, all completely unfair. Over the next 12 hours, by 9 a.m. the next day, Jesus would be put on a cross. By 3 p.m. the same day, the skies would grow dark, the curtain of the Holy of Holies would split, and Jesus would cry out for the last time and die on the cross. But that's not where the story stops. 3 days later, Jesus raises from the dead. He defeats sin, and salvation is offered through his sacrifice. But before we got to that day, Jesus was preparing his disciples to go from being the ones being served to the ones doing the serving. As we look into John 13, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew the hour had come for him to leave and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal and took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, you are going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash your feet, you have no part of me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. And Jesus answered, those who have been bathed need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Jesus knew he had to prepare his disciples, and he knew he had to set the example for how they were going to be. These are young men. Most of them were under 20, and they had to make a decision about how they were going to live life. And Jesus, his ministry was so important to him that he had to make sure that they understood what was going to happen. The same is true in our faith. We cannot base our faith off of someone else's faith. Their faith had to be based off of God and not Jesus' life. All of us are called to teach all of those who desire to know God with a relationship and walk with God. We are blessed to have children who love and follow God. Our family is, and the many of the families in this church. It may be messy sometimes, but then isn't always for some. I wish I could say that it was because of how strong of parents we are as Christians that our kids follow Christ. But I'm telling you right now, there are teachers that have changed our kids' lives even more than we have at times. I need to tell you guys something as a church, how you've impacted even one of my kids, Micah. So Micah, a couple weeks ago, comes to me and says, Dad, why is this church different than our other church? I was like, what do you mean? You have to ask those questions because Micah may have, Dave understands. He's his boss, so he understands. But Micah asked that question. I said, okay, clarify. What are you asking? And he said, here at this church, people hug me. People kiss me on the forehead when they come in the church. People are happy to see me. I never had that at my last church. And I said, Micah, every church is different. Every church does things differently. But I'm telling you right now that at least in the life of my one son, this church, Brady Lane Church, has changed his life in the respect that he knows that he is loved by God, Jesus, and this church, and everyone who comes through. That is way more important as a parent than anything else that we could do. I'm going to finish with my main point today. As families, and the worship can come forward as we're doing this. Sorry. As families, as a church, we must keep doing and we must keep being that church. When we are balanced in our serving and being served in life, Christ will shine through. Church, let's be Jesus to this world.